Hello everybody, here we are 1 week later, and for those of you watching that video, I have to preface it with, we tried all the stuff we're going to try tonight. We tried it last week, and we were trying to be brave and install NetBeans version 11 to do our work in Unit 5 in Chapter 39. And despite what the documentation told us about supporting Java Enterprise Edition and JSF within its environment, I found through significant trial and error that it just plain and simple doesn't work. So what I've done here in Unit 5, just so you guys are aware, today is November 14th, 2019. It's a Thursday evening here on campus, and I just updated these listings and put out some announcements earlier today regarding the NetBeans versions. So it seems that, you know, the old adage of, like, you know, the enterprise versions, you stick with what works. You know, the enterprise versions are still all on 8, and it's no surprise that all the NetBeans versions version numbers for Enterprise Edition match up with the ones that work. And so what we're going to be doing here is, even though last week we worked on installing NetBeans version 11, I'm going to ask you that you either uninstall NetBeans 11 if you're limited on disk space. You can always leave it. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to hurt anything. And if you don't want to do that, or if you don't have it installed yet, you're going to opt to go ahead and install NetBeans, because we do need NetBeans to do some of this web work. It's not that we couldn't do it in Eclipse, but NetBeans, when it's configured properly and you're using the right versions, in some ways it's a little bit easier to use because you don't have to go hunting for plugins and make weird settings and stuff. It just kind of works. That wasn't what happened in class last week, but that's okay. You know, we kind of live and learn. So what I do need you to do is to download NetBeans from one of these two links. And what I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to go over to the official site where they have this little, like, download screen here. And you're going to notice that in the old days, you know, they had like so many different ways you could download NetBeans, but I always loved going to this page best, very simply because it gave you choices as to what versions you're installing. So, you know, for most people, they're not aware of the fact that usually when they're working with Java, and like in the first version of you know, Java Programming 1 class, you know, we're just simply working with the Java SE technology. We're working with the standard edition stuff that's been around for a really long time, and a lot of applications are built that way. However, there's some components that we really need to do higher end work, and most of that stuff resides in this particular library, the Java Enterprise Edition. And so if you wanted, you could probably do most of the stuff that we need here for class, including Java effects, using that version. However, you know, since you're in here, right, and you're downloading stuff, and you're a coder that does other languages too, you notice how if you choose this all version, you can actually do web development, PHP, C and C++, and a couple of other weird frameworks you've never heard of. And then you'll notice how the Java Enterprise Edition and the all version also include bundled servers for allowing you to do your web work. So my recommendation to you is that you probably download this version here and install that one. If you don't want all those extra tools, you know, you're not going to do web development and C coding or whatever in NetBeans, then maybe you just want to skip that and come here. It's not really that much smaller, although keep in mind that these are decompress out a little bit, so they get to be about a half a gig in size when they're all said and done. So I recommend that you download this version. If you want to save time on the download, you may actually opt to choose the second link that I have here, where I have the stuff loaded up on Apollo. I have both the Mac version and the Windows version. The download will be much faster, especially if you're on campus. It should download like really in seconds if you're on the campus network, because, you know, literally the server is down the hall. So please make sure you download and install those. One thing you should know is if you are working on a system that doesn't have any Java stuff on it, what's cool about the NetBeans installer is it will go ahead and add the JDK and the JRE automatically to your system. Excuse me, which is pretty helpful. And Had to get a Kleenex, sorry. And you know, the install should go pretty smooth. It does have to decompress a large number of files, so it does take a few minutes. So those of you in class, you should get started on this immediately. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and assume at this point in the video that you guys have already finished the install, and if you haven't, you should pause the video and do the install and get it all up and running. When everything is said and done, it will create a start menu item for NetBeans, and then when you run the product, of course, you can go ahead and maybe pin that to your taskbar if you plan on using it a lot. So the icons are pretty similar between the version 8 and version 11. I have both of them down here, but I am going to launch version 8.2. And now, what's really kind of notable about this, this is, it focuses around the Enterprise Edition, and this was the last version that was released by Oracle directly. After version 8.2, they decided to farm this off to the Apache Software Foundation, and they do lots of like freeware stuff, and I'm not really sure why that choice was made. But even before they shuffled things off, they always had IDEs and development libraries for the SE versions on version 9, 10, and now 11, and I know 12 is already in draft. And you know what? None of those higher level ones ever supported the Enterprise Edition stuff. That stuff's always slower to update, just so you know. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and launch NetBeans and get it up on the screen. It'll just take a few moments to launch here. All right, and there we are. All right, so now we are looking at a brand new IDE, one that's different from the Eclipse that we've been using most of this semester. But there's nothing to be intimidated about here. It's just a different tool. It's got a little bit different feel to the interface. In fact, guess what language they use to develop the IDE? PHP. Right? No, Java. Right? Yeah, PHP. And it has a very Java-like appearance to it because they basically built this using Swing and AWT GUI components, stuff that I usually don't teach in my Java classes because it really is kind of an antiquated technology. And really the interface looks a little clunky and old, but I assure you that all the stuff it does underneath is really powerful. I think there's ways to actually skin NetBeans if you really care, but I don't know why you'd really go to that trouble, honestly. All right, whenever you launch the IDE, it's going to always come up to the start page unless you tell it not to. But I usually typically leave it alone. But if you wanted to get rid of it, you just get rid of that checkbox up here, and that will take care of it. When you go ahead and you close that start page, you can see that the window is arranged in not too dissimilar a fashion than what you see with other IDEs. So it's more like Eclipse than a lot of other IDEs. And on the left-hand side there, up near the top, you'll see we have a panel where it lists all the projects. And that project area, and you can see I have a couple things here that I was working on, including my test, whatever I typed in there. Yeah, that was a frustration thing trying to figure this stuff out. And the funny thing is I was working on 11, and I popped in here to 8, and I just typed out the code really quick, hit run, and of course it worked perfectly on the first try, which really kind of made me knock my head a few times going, why did I even try to do 11? That was really foolish, especially in class. Usually, I should probably try to do that stuff in advance. But you know what? I always plan in advanced classes like this, especially with Java 2 and a couple of other higher level ones. We always run into glitches with higher end classes, so I kind of factor that in. So I guess the other thing I should note, and this won't apply to people watching this in subsequent semesters, but for fall 2019, I also went ahead and released all the remaining units for the course, just so that you guys can plan ahead. So you can look at the due dates, figure out what you have to do, and kind of lay things out for yourselves. The other thing I'm going to mention to you, like I did in the announcement I just made a little earlier, is that we do have a final project, and I wanted that to be out there so you guys were aware of that, I should say. And the point of it is that the final project is worth 8 points in this class. And what I typically have you do is recreate the project that you created in your Java 1 class, which should have been a console application, and have you convert that into a GUI application using any of the GUI formats that we learned. So that would be JavaFX, it'll be JSF, which you're learning today, servlets, or JSP. As we get to that last week, I'm going to go ahead and give you some demonstrations of other people's completed projects. And now that our Kronos web server is back up and running, I have a couple of really cool ones that people did that were web-based that were pretty impressive, and they are up and running again, so that's kind of fun. So if you decide to opt out of the final project, keep in mind you can always go back and do any of the extra credit all the way back to the beginning of the semester, including the extra credit that was available for the midterm exam, and pick up the points to make a difference. The whole point is, without that final project, if you don't do the extra credit and you don't do the final project, there's absolutely no way you can earn an A in this class. It's not possible. Okay, you have to put in the effort, in one area or the other. So for some of you, I hope that you try to do the final project, and for some of you it might seem like really overwhelming. I do also give partial credit for it, so if you want to make an attempt and you don't finish it, I can give you points for at least trying. So that's something to consider as well. Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right. Next thing that we should do is we should get into the chapter. I do have the book open here on my screen. So we're going to talk about this technology called JavaServer Faces. What's pretty notable about this is what I would call the most modern of the web-based approaches that Java works with. And really the one that most modern professionals that are choosing to do web output are typically picking this technology over some of the older ones. Not that the older ones aren't valid and not still heavily used, and I'm speaking of servlets and more specifically JSP, which is probably the prevalent one from the past. But this one uses an approach where it separates the back-end code, the Java code, from the actual HTML document. And that's really a pretty big takeaway. So we're going to learn all these different things that you see listed on the screen here. To some degree, we're going to be working through some of the examples, not all of them in the chapter, but some of the examples do get us to the point where we're building actually our homework. And with any luck, we're going to get to the homework tonight too, which we weren't able to do last week. All right, let's move down to some of the material, and let's talk a little bit about how this technology works, what it stands for, and how it's integrated. Now, basically, what we're doing here, and for those of you that have learned some back-end coding, and whether that's in JavaScript using Node.js or PHP, those are probably the only two back-end languages you've learned so far. You understand that you can either intermingle code with your web page or write code that just exists on the server that does actions on the server side and then pushes content to the web browser for the users to see. And really what we're doing here, folks, is we're basically going to build the same kind of applications we've been building all along, but the output mechanism, instead of pushing into your operating system, is pushing to a web browser. And it's very powerful. When you consider how much content is delivered via the web, either through mobile applications or desktop applications, it's pretty huge. Java Server Faces does require that we build our content on top of actually a pre-existing HTML technology called XHTML. And I'm not going to go really deep into a talk about it like I did last week, but suffice it to say that XHTML was actually the standard before we had HTML5. A lot of people have this misconception that we went from HTML4 right to HTML5. Not the case at all. We went from HTML4, which had very loose standards, to the more rigid XML-based standards of XHTML 1.0 and 1.1, and that standard was prevalent for about a decade, from I'm going to guess roughly 2005 until 2015, when HTML5 became the standard. What's interesting about that is XHTML, the reason that we use that as our doc type when we're creating our web pages here is because XHTML enforces strictness within the tag structure, which is required in order for our applications to work. Without that strictness, you're going to have problems. And I'll demonstrate to you as we start working where that strictness applies. For the most part, you can use all the standard HTML5 stuff that you already know with a couple little tweaks. You just have to make sure every tag is properly closed, whether it's self-closing or has a separate closing tag. And that's really kind of about it. When it comes to styling a document, you can use all the CSS techniques that you know. It works just fine. You can throw JavaScript in. You can even combine other back-end languages if you really want to go that far. That's not our focus here. Our focus is going to be just to get the stuff working. And then as we work into the exercises, we're also going to start connecting this technology to a database, which is really huge. So let's move on to like the example here. And one of the things that we're going to do is just step through what they're doing here just to demonstrate how it works. And this is where we got to last week, right after our install, and things failed miserably. The build wasn't that bad. It was everything that followed that was the problem. All right, so with NetBeans up and running, I'm going to move this over to screen number 2 here, just for reference, as I almost always do. I'm going to get NetBeans up here, and we're going to go ahead and choose to create a new project. Now in NetBeans, you can do that either from the File menu, just like you would in Eclipse, or you can do it from the toolbar, just like you can in Eclipse. So I'm going to do it from the toolbar, and then we're going to go ahead and start choosing all the project parameters. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to choose Java Web as our framework. Now notice, for those of you that were in class last week, when we were looking for stuff, Java EE wasn't even a possibility, and you see how it's listed here automatically. It's just there, right? So also, you should take the time and kind of look through and see all the other stuff, and including, and if for those of you that are interested, they do bundle in a whole bunch of samples. So like if you were interested in like creating like, I don't know, the Brick Breaker game using Java effects, they got code for it right here, samples. If you guys want to see how game development is done, feel free to explore. It's kind of fun actually to do that at times. All right, I'm going to go back to Java Web. I'm going to go ahead and choose Web Application, and then I'm going to click Next. All right. From here, we need to start naming our stuff. So I'm going to choose to name it just the way they're naming it, which is JSF 2 Demo. And you know what? See how I'm getting a little flag at the bottom? It's all red text. It says, hey, that already exists and is not empty. Well, you know what? That's right, because I did it last week. So I'm just going to call it JSF 1 Demo, if that's all right with you guys, because I don't have that one. So that's the one I'm going to do. All right, and actually here, actually I think I'm making a little bit of a mistake. Let's actually go back with that original name, because I'm noticing that this is last year's Java folder. All right, so let's get it to the right folder. Maybe that'll correct that problem. So I have 2019 fall, and we'll choose that. And of course, I still have it. So back to JSF 1. All right, so there we go. But at least now it's going into the right folder. Isn't that fun? All right. Choose whatever folder you use to store your stuff. I always put my stuff in cloud drives whenever I can. So this is going to my Google Drive. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And at this point, we have to choose our web server and the Java version that we're using to drive the whole thing. So this does come pre-bundled with Glassfish, and chances are that it should already be in your drop-down probably as the only choice. If you do have XAMPP installed on your machine, and those of you that have done PHP work will know exactly what I'm talking about, you can also attach to the Tomcat web server by using the add link and just finding the executable for Tomcat on your system. That's not really necessary. I think Glassfish is a little bit more elegant and simple to operate. It could be that you might actually be working, if you did a fresh download, your Glassfish version might be higher. I don't know. But whatever version comes up is probably going to work just fine. As far as the EE version, you go with the highest one that you possibly can choose. And then I want you to notice here that there's a little bit of a discrepancy, because you guys are probably saying in the back of your head that, hey, I thought we were using Java EE8. Right, we are, but for web, it's different. It's a separate version stream. All right, so choose the highest one that's available in the IDE. For me, it's 7. All right. They also have this context path. Just leave that alone. It'll name right off the project name. I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And then, of course, since we are working with JavaServer Faces, we want to click the little box. I am clicking it. I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, there it goes. Okay, I was just being a little hesitant. Make sure you click JavaServer Faces, and once you've made that selection, you should be good to go. Go ahead and click Finish, and then this will go ahead and build out your project structure over in the project pane. All right. We'll just take a second to populate over there. All right, so you see, here's my project node. I'm going to collapse the other ones down and expand this one. And as you look at the screen, I want you to kind of start, kind of doing what I guess what I would call intelligent observation of like what you're working with. Notice that unlike the stuff that we were doing in Eclipse, where some of the stuff was there. So there may have been configuration files. I forget how they're listed in Eclipse. But there certainly were libraries and there certainly were source packages. What we didn't see was a separate folder or really construct for storing web pages. Because we are building our front end, our GUI, right, folks, is going to be the web, our browser. The other thing that you might want to preemptively do is come up to your toolbar here, because if you hit the Run button on any project, it's going to run this web application by pushing it out to the Glassfish internal server and then pushing out to whatever browser you have pre-selected. And if you notice here, it says the IDE's default browser, not your system default, but your IDE's. So I'm going to click this little drop down here and notice that I think that's Internet Explorer. That's horrible. No, don't do it. But I also want you to notice some of the options that are here. So there are there is the ability to just directly pump it to whichever browser you choose. So I would probably choose Chrome myself from the bottom. But I want to point out that if you choose one of the ones up in the top section, this will ask you to install a connector plugin with Chrome, so it feeds it directly into Chrome. I'm not sure what the functional difference is, but my opting is always never to add more plugins in my browser than I need, because Chrome is enough of a memory hog as it is. So I'm just going to push it directly to Chrome. But notice that you can also push to Android devices or emulators. So it is possible that you could push this directly to a phone. Now I haven't tried this with NetBeans, but if it works like Eclipse, usually your phone's got to be tethered on the system with a cable or Bluetooth or something, and then you can push the page directly to your phone. If you're interested, go for it. No extra credit for that, but it's fun to play with. All right, but I'm going to choose Chrome, and I'm doing that preemptively. All right, let's explore the folder structure just a little bit more. I'm going to open up the web folder, and you're going to see inside there that there is an index page called index.html, which automatically opened as the project was created. So you guys notice that little aspect. I'm also noticing here, you see this red line here? This is like the word wrap point, typical for 80-column documents. And I'm going to go ahead and enable word wrap, and I always forget how to do it in NetBeans. And I guess you have to go to the Options menu under Tools. I'm assuming under the Editor, right here, line wrap, and then you want to do it afterwards. Okay, so it doesn't do it mid-word. And it didn't do it at all. All right, well, whatever. Oh, you know why it's not doing it? It's because the screen's wide enough to support it right now. Okay, that's why. All right, so we're okay with it. All right, as we look at this document, I want you to notice a couple of interesting things about it. First of all, I could probably make my font a little bigger, so let's go back and do that. Fonts and colors. I'm already in 18, but sometimes as I'm teaching, I always think that it's a little hard to see, so I'm just going to bump it up a size here, and that will help. All right. All right, so let's do a little critical examination of this document that we see here. The first and probably most notable thing is you're going to notice that we actually have two doc types declared, and not necessarily by name, but anybody that's ever done any XML document creation or modification will recognize that on line 1, we actually have the XML doc type declaration. So all XML documents are required to have this at the top, so that the parser knows that we're dealing with XML. Then, somewhat seemingly in conflict, we have a secondary doc type for HTML, but it does focus on the XHTML version 1.0. And remember that XHTML, what it brings to the mix here is the strictness of XML, which is partially what allows our applications to function properly. Without that strictness, often, browser might work with it, but a programming language really wants a rigid structure and precise syntax in order to be able to push content into containers. So that's why we use XHTML. Now, the HTML tag on line 3 also includes what we call an XML namespace, and really what that indicates to it is how we're naming things and how we're placing things and what rule sets we're following in combination with the doc type declaration. And that is really common. So if you were working in HTML 4.0 or XHTML 1 or 1.1, you would always include what's on line 2 and what's on line 3. What's a little bit different here is the fact that there's a secondary namespace on the HTML tag, and notice how it has that little inclusion of a :H. And what that is a specific one that actually points to the Java files that describe custom HTML tags that work specifically with this infrastructure, which is JavaServer Faces. So you'll notice that we do have a head tag and a body tag like we do in a regular HTML document, but those are prefaced with the letter H. What's fascinating though is that if we do run this, and I'm going to run it in just a second and push it out to a browser, those disappear, and really what happens is it creates the HTML tag, but it does so programmatically. You might ask yourself, why on earth would I just not use a regular tag? Because this allows Java on the back end, using JavaServer Faces technology, to interface with the tags and manipulate those tags directly, without having to bring in a third technology like JavaScript or jQuery to do it for us. So if you're familiar with what JavaScript can do to a page, which is to alter the tags, create new ones, apply classes, change the styles, animate things, yada, yada, yada. The same thing can happen with Java, but Java requires that you put in these prefixes in order to make it work. For right now, we're just going to start with the H's, but later on when we're working with forms, we'll also include one that has a F and a :, as well. All right, let's go ahead and actually launch this so you can see the process of doing that. And you can do it a number of different ways. One way that a lot of students do it is they'll come here, they'll right-click and run the file, or once you've made your browser selection, you can just come up here and hit the Run button. And then as you hit that Run button, I want you to notice the output window. First, it will start to build the application, and then it will go ahead and launch the Glassfish server in its own tab. There's also the Java database process that runs in the back end that kind of runs with everything. And so what this is doing is it's actually launching a separate piece of software that's attached to NetBeans that is a web server. All right, and it'll go through like some scripts and all that, and we'll just let it do its work. On the first run, it will take a little bit of time for everything to load up. But the interesting thing is once it's up and running, you usually don't have to futz with it too much, and you can usually go back to your application, make changes, rerun it, and it'll be just fine. If you do run into glitches though, what I might suggest is you can come in here, and if you're not sure if Glassfish is the problem, there's like a stop button on the server. You can actually stop it. Now you see it just came active. And you can stop the server and restart it manually. Of course, launching the application will do that anyhow. And we got our thing up on the screen. So this shows us that it's working. It is working off of, you know, a kind of a loopback address called localhost, and it's not working on port 80, it's working on port 8080, and that's the default for Glassfish. Then you'll notice that following the URL will be the name of the application, right? And then off the root of the application, of course, it's pulling in the index page, just as like it does for any website, and this is the index page right here. And that is the message that we put in, right? If you want, yes, you can throw in whatever HTML tags you know in here, and they will work. Of course, it's trying to auto-type the closing tag, and I don't want to put it there. Obviously, I want to put it at the end of the line. So I could save that, I could go back, and I can refresh, and now it's an H2. See how easy that was? I didn't have to stop the server or anything. I can just update the page, save it, go back, refresh, and it's there. Okay. The interesting thing is if you do your right-click and do a view source, which you should, as web people, you guys should be doing this all the time, right? It'll come in here, and you'll look at the output of what the interface did. And this is kind of interesting, right? Because it's probably not exactly what you anticipated. Look at the doc type output it did. Notice how it's not an XHTML format? What format is it in? HTML5. However, it still has the XHTML namespace to enforce the strictness of the rules. It didn't forget to put the head part of the document in. It's there. It's just not the prettiest thing. And heck, did I put in this ID? No, it did it automatically, programmatically. There's no H prefix or anything like that. It also created the body tag and a little adjustment that I made. It is valid HTML. It's not the prettiest thing. It still includes that XML declaration up at the top, which once again we need for the application delivery. All right, so just to kind of demystify the process just a little bit. All right, we went around the room here and made sure everybody's was working, and we ran into a couple of interesting little glitches. And let me show you what some of those glitches were. Nathan, for example, if you don't mind that I call you out by name too late, now it's already in the video, and I'm not editing it, by the way. Nathan, when he was hitting his run button, it would give him I think a 404 error, yeah, right? Yeah. But if he came up here and just did a right click and run file, it worked just fine.
Or Shift F6.
Or Shift F6, okay. Katie had the issue where she was trying to run it, and we were looking at the process. The build was successful. This seemed okay. And then we came here and it had a long list of Java exceptions. And whenever you get exception, or debug errors, you always want to go to the topmost one first, because that's usually the root cause. And it said that it couldn't launch Glassfish because the address was already in use. And it turned out that she had XAMPP running in the background. And so we brought up the control panel for that and made sure that the Apache web server and the MySQL server were both turned off. And as soon as we turned those off and we went back and ran it, boom, it came up. For Vaughn, you had to uninstall, right, completely,
Yeah.
and then reinstall, and then you had a problem with one of the log files.
In the app directory.
In the app, the app data directory, okay. And then, so you figured out that you removed the log file, and then you were able to reinstall 8.2, and you were fine.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, but if you do run into issues, don't hesitate to contact me, because chances are you probably already run into the issue, either on a Mac or a PC platform, because I do try it out on both. So hopefully it worked for you. So let's just say that it did work. Let's move on and go to the next example. So I'm bringing the book back over onto the screen, and we basically just completed this little step through, and I wouldn't even call it an exercise, but it's kind of like a necessary first step to make sure that things work. So we were able to get through there. The author goes through and he starts to explain the tags, I guess, maybe in a less verbose fashion than me when it comes down to it. But what we need to do now is actually get to the point where we're creating Java code to work with the application. So we just did an HTML thing, and that worked. So that's obviously a necessary first step. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add what we call a JavaBean to the application. But I want to make a little bit of a side note here first. And those of you in the classroom, you heard this last week, I guess, a little bit. But in the old days, we would, if we would write Java code for a web browser, often what we would do is we would get plugins for the browser that would create a browser-based JRE, a runtime environment inside the browser via a plugin like you do for Flash, that you could just take your Java code and push it directly into the environment it would run. Unfortunately, that also gave hackers the ability to completely compromise your system. It's considered highly insecure. And even though there are ways to kind of force your browsers to do it now, I don't think you can do it with Chrome anymore. I think you can still do it with Firefox. It's considered very antiquated and not really an approach that we use. And the approach was called creating Java applets. And when I first learned how to do web work with Java, that's what we were doing. And this is a good 20 years ago. All right, but now when you create Java code for these applications, you call what we call managed JavaBeans, and you may have heard JavaBeans, and it's an obvious correlation: coffee beans, JavaBeans. But those are basically the little programs that we write to help drive our applications. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to follow the steps now that are in section 39.2.3. And it gives us a step-by-step, so I'm going to right to the first step here, and it says right-click the project node, so that would be this in your project, and you want to choose from the new menu a JSF managed bean. Now for those of you launching NetBeans for the first time, there's a very good chance that this is not on that list. Okay? For me, it's on that list because clearly I've been doing this recently, and that's how this list works. So you can see that I've got managed beans and JSPs and servlets and JSFs because I've been doing a lot of that with this product. So if you don't see what you need, you have to go to Other, and I swear I clicked it. I'm waiting for my machine. There we go. To find it. And then we need to find the managed bean. And I always forget where it's located, but it's probably under JavaServer Faces, so you should have an interface that says that. And then you just select the managed bean. Once you have it, go ahead and click Next, and then you'll need to give it a name. So the first thing we'll do is name it as so. So we're going to call it Time Bean, just like this. The project we can leave alone, and if you want to put in a package declaration, make sure it matches the name of your project. Most highly recommended that you do it that way. It's easier. You can actually create separate names for your packages if you wish. Could you omit it? Yeah, sure. It's not considered secure though, and NetBeans gripes about it if you don't follow their rules, so we're going to follow it. The next thing that we're going to do is make sure that the name is set to Time Bean, and I want you to notice how this is switched to camel case here, where it's a lowercase t to start. And that name will also become an alias for the separate file. And then we also need to change the scope of the application to request. Now, the scope of the application really depends on the kind of stuff you're doing and the interactions between the program file and the front end. In this case, we're just requesting information from it to come back. So we're not interacting with that program file. We're just running it and pulling whatever it's sending back. That's why it's request scoped. All right. When you're all done, click Finish, and then that will build out in the package structure a file called timebean.java, and you'll notice that it is just a Java file in the background. You guys notice that Glassfish is like doing all this stuff in the background, and in fact it just threw some sort of an exception because the application's still running. My error on the side of caution here is it's recognized that we just threw a program file in there and it's not ready to run it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this little stop button here, and if Glassfish isn't forward, you can flip between the tabs. So I'm just going to go to the Glassfish tab and just hit stop. And remember, the reason that we're doing this is before we can run the application and have it connect to the Java file has to be compiled, right? It has to be turned from high-level code into machine code, and that it has to turn into a binary first. So Glassfish is basically griping, saying, hey, you just threw something in there that needs to be compiled. It's not compiled, and I'm still running. What are you doing? Right? So that's something you always have to do. So we're just being kind of preemptive on it. Let's go ahead and kind of give us a little screen space here, and let's take a look at what it automatically created. This is a typical Java file. Nothing really fancy about it. It has some comment sections where there are, pieces of code in there. You can leave those in if you want. You can delete them, alter them, whatever you want to do. I really don't care, as long as the program works. When it comes down to some of the stuff that we're doing here, we see our package declaration and a couple of imports that were automatically created just by choosing the things from the dialogues. And then from there, it threw in a couple of directives. And you notice the @ sign here. So this is sending a special directive that says that instead of referring to this as time being with a capital T, we can also refer to it as time being like this. And you know what? You could give it actually a completely different name if you want and still have it operate. So some people will do it a number of different ways. My advice is you kind of name it the same as the class or real similar, but your choice. All right. The scope of the application is also listed here, request scope, and you can see that it also pulls in an enterprise library that allows that to work. So this is also set to request scoped. Inside the class file itself, by default, it creates a constructor function. If it's necessary, in this case, we're probably not even going to use it, but we are going to create a little bit of code to put inside here just to make sure that this is actually working. So we're going to go ahead and create a separate little method. I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff that's in here already, and I'm just going to type it out by hand instead of copy pasting it, which I often do. And this is going to be called GetTime, but it's going to return a string, so we have to put that in there. And then we're just going to say GetTime with parens and then curlies. Inside here, we're just going to put a really simple return statement where it's going to instantiate the current time from the system. So we're going to pull it from the Java utility date library, and then we are going to convert that to a string, and that's all we're going to do. So this is going to create an object that reads the system time, converts it to a string, and sends it back to wherever it was called from.
Case sensitive. Case sensitive, huh?
Yes, it is. It is case sensitive. All of these have to be listed. If you're unsure, you can always use the IntelliSense to let it kind of auto-complete the stuff and make sure that you're getting it in there the right way. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is now we're going to flip back now that we have this code created. Very simple. Now that we have this code created, we're going to flip back to our index file, and we're going to drop in a little content here that is going to allow us to see what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace this text in the body section. And you notice I'm in an H2 tag because I was goofing around with it, and you don't even have to be inside a tag typically, but I'm going to tell you what. If you really want to follow the proper rules of HTML and the proper rules of XML, you should never, ever have text free-floating in an HTML document. It should always be encapsulated in some structure. Now granted, without the H2 tags, it is sitting inside the body tag. But the body tag is not really a good container for text. What you should do is have a paragraph, a div, an H2, whatever. I'm just choosing H2 because it's a little bit bigger and easier to see, so I'm going to stick with that. But I'm going to change the text inside the tags to read like this. I'm going to say the current time is, and now here's the syntax we use to connect to our bean. So we use a hash, or a pound sign if you want to call it that, a set of curlies, and then inside the curlies, the name alias basically that we created for our separate application. Yeah, IntelliSense should do it for you if you type slow enough. Sometimes I type too fast. And then we also can, notice how it automatically found a method inside there, and I'm just going to let it choose for me. So I'm calling the external application, and I'm calling the GetTime method from within it. What's interesting about this is this. I can just say time, and even though that method is called GetTime, it's implied. Okay, it ignores the get, and it just goes right to time. You can also do this if you really want. You can say GetTime with parens, and it's functionally the same thing. But the point is, if you're doing gets and sets and whatever, you can use the abbreviated version. The IntelliSense pulled it up, so it must be valid, right? So that's what we're going to go with. The other thing that we're going to do, just to have a little bit of fun, is the book adds a meta tag to the header section here. And I don't know if you guys ever learned this trick or not. And maybe you have, maybe you haven't, and it's not really all that fancy. But there's a meta tag that allows you to actually refresh the browser automatically based on time intervals. And what the book is suggesting is that you have it refresh every 60 seconds like this. And then notice I'm closing my meta tag, not just with a bracket, but with a self-closing tag. And that's required with XHTML. I can't use this. See how it flags it red right away when I get rid of it? It's got to be there. The other thing that's kind of curious is if you're used to using other tags that don't require a closing, like a break, line break, I can put it in, but you notice what it did? It wants to put in a closing line break tag. That's really ugly. Or you can use the XHTML approach, which is to do this, and that's valid. Or if I wanted to put in like an HR tag, I'd have to do this. Or if I did like an input tag, where in regular HTML5 you can just close it and it's okay. In XHTML it's not okay. It has to have a closing tag, even if it's empty. Right, so that's just more informative than anything else. The one thing I'm going to do though is I'm going to tell you this, is that refresh rate for me is kind of impractical, all right? Because what it'll do is it'll load the page, display the time, and then 1 minute later it will update. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this to 10 seconds, because frankly I just don't want to wait a whole minute, I get bored quickly. All right. I just did a save, and hopefully you guys did the save. And then I want you, oh, you know what? See, I made a mistake here. I should have created a brand new file. That's the book asked me to create a file called currenttime.xhtml. Right? You know what?
It'll still work.
It'll still work. But you know what? Let's go ahead and change it. See, can we rename it from here? Doesn't? Yeah. We can probably just do a save as, right?
Yep.
All right. This is just so we can follow the book example, folks. Yeah, and you do have to put the X in front of the HTML. All right. So now both of them do the same thing. You know what I could do is I could switch this one back to like something obnoxious like that, like I usually do, and then I can get rid of the meta tag because I don't need it. All right. Just so we know, right? But what we're going to do is we're actually going to run this page, the current time. Oh wait, so so here I am tweaking the wrong page the wrong way. I'm batting 1,000 here, folks. All right. So I'm going to do a little swaparoo here, because we want this code on this page, right? And then we also want to steal the meta tag from here and put it on the current time page. And hopefully you guys didn't screw this up as much as I did, but you have the advantage of watching me screw up and then not doing it. So, all right. I'm also going to change the title, and I'm going to be kind of clever and just say tick tock. All right. Let's save all that stuff. In fact, if you want, come up here, hit the save all icon. That's a good idea. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to launch this. Now, if I hit the run button, just so you guys know, by default, it'll go to what? Index, right? So that's why the book tells you to right-click and run file. So it'll run right to that page. So this is going to launch, the debugger, which is going to compile our code, and then it's also going to trigger Glassfish to run. So you can see that's starting to fire up. We'll just let it do its thing, and then when it's all set, the browser should pop up, hopefully with the time in it, and then every 10 seconds the time will update. And what I'll do is I'll watch my recorder clock here and then make sure that it actually updates. So we're just giving it a second to build out. So every time you relaunch the web server, you have to wait a little bit. If you're tweaking just HTML pages, it doesn't really care so much. If you're changing Java pages, that does require that you restart the server, because the server is running the compiled version of the code. That's kind of the big takeaway here. So I'm hoping that the browser seems like it worked. Let me see, where the heck's my browser? Here it is, right here. TikTok, there it is. All right, so let's see, about 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, I don't know how, yeah, there we go. So it just changed. Top Glassfish, now that I'm thinking about it, I can actually just change my time page, and I'm going to switch the refresh to 1 second. So I'm going to have a clock on screen that's counting the seconds live on screen. So that's actually kind of cool. All right, so let's see if that works. It's got to do a refresh on the page, though. And so now you see it is refresh, and you can see that it's refreshing because you notice how the favorite icon is flashing. That's one of the clues to show you that you're actually refreshing the page. But it is refreshing. It looks like magic. But there you go, folks. Real simple and real functional. It's just reading the system time automatically. This is not really the best way to have a live clock on a screen, by the way. It's pretty inefficient because every time it's updating, it's going back to the server and coming back. That's not really efficient, just so you know. Better off doing it with JavaScript, really. But just proof of concept, basically. All right, I just went ahead and closed those windows, just so you know. I'm getting rid of some of my unnecessary tabs here, kind of in preparation to do some more work. So now I'm moving on to section 39.3, and we're going to work on another chapter exercise, and this one's called Student Registration Form. Now, just so you know, all the code for this is already provided, right? So the code's right here, so we're just copying this code. But we are ramping up what we're doing a little bit, so we're going to build this aspect of this application. What is kind of new here is, notice that we're going to add some additional references in the namespaces. So we're adding a prefix for F, and that's because now we're going to start to add user interface controls to our web page in the form of form elements, and thus the F. And that's how you render JavaServer Faces form stuff to your screen. So let's take a look just really quickly before we actually start putting code in there. Some of the examples that they have here for what these prefix tags will actually do for you. And I think this is kind of fascinating. So by using these prefixes, by using these prefixes will actually result in an output that creates an HTML tag to match. That's really kind of their point. But the question you might have in your mind is why? Because these tags allow for the Java code to interface with the page and rewrite the tags and do whatever we need to do with them automatically and dynamically. Because Java code natively does not have the ability to rewrite HTML, we're using Java to control Java-based HTML tags, which are custom. Thus the whole XML and XHTML thing. And if you didn't know this, ever since XHTML, the HTML standard supports the creation of custom created tags. So you can create your own HTML tags, and all it takes to render them, and if you remember this from last week, is you just include in your CSS a display indicator. So you just say, like if you create a tag called whatever, you just say whatever, curly brackets, display block or display inline,
Right.
and it'll show up, and then you can style it any way you want. It doesn't matter that the browser doesn't know how to read it, because it's XML based, it'll do it. But some of these are kind of interesting because you know, I mean, there's really kind of like a whole catalog of these possible tags, but they're just demonstrating some of them. What we are going to build is we're going to build a form that looks like this, pretty simplistic, and then we're going to hopefully connect it up with our database. So they're giving you all the sample code here, and we're just going to look at it really quick first before we actually play with it. And you see that it goes ahead and, okay, well, it starts up here, right? So we have that additional namespace, and then we start creating an HTML form. So you see how they have an H form, and that creates the form. Once we're inside there, we can use regular tags, and you see here that they're actually throwing in an image. Now, I have students ask, well, why are we using, can't we just use a regular image tag here?
Yeah.
You know what, you can. You want to pull in the image with a regular tag? Go for it. But this approach gives us the ability to interface with those special tags and see how they work. So that's why we're doing it. All right. And then as you move down into the document, we're going to end up creating basically what we call little sections of the form. So when you see panel grid, there's kind of a little bit of a crossover. Think of like a grid pane,
Yeah.
right? And how many columns it has. And then look at the items that we're putting in here. So we're putting a label for last name, an input field for last name, first name, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's a total of 6 items. So that's why we're creating a panel grid of 6 columns. So if you look back at this, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 items in that row. That's what we're doing. Okay. Do you have to bundle the stuff into a panel grid? No, you really don't. You could just go right to the output, but then it gets a little messier. What the panel grid does is it creates a block level element to place it all into that can then be controlled separately. It enforces that it's all on one line, basically. The next thing that we'll do is create another panel grid with enough columns to hold an output label and then a selection of radio buttons. You see how they're doing that. And then another one that creates some additional select boxes or check boxes, if you want to call them that, so people can choose their items. Another one that allows you to select what hobby you have. And then finally, a text input area of a specified size. And then finally, what we call the command button, or what we know in HTML as the submit button. And then, of course, you hit that button and it triggers everything to run. Okay? So that's the first part of it. So, all right, but as we're building these particular examples, it's really kind of silly if you're going to take the time to retype all the stuff that's in the book. And I don't know how many of you have tried this, but if you come in to that PDF and you start like highlighting the code, you can't help but also grab the column, row numbers, you know,
Right.
and then you have to delete them out, and oh my God. But you know that the author does give you all the code. So what I did as a courtesy to you guys is I grabbed all that code and I have it in a zip right here in the unit folder. So you can download this and just open it up as a project inside of NetBeans and just kind of follow along. So you can just basically to see how it works without having to manually build it all the way through. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I went ahead and downloaded the zip and unzipped it, and so I have those folders open here. So you see I have the JSF 2 demo. I want to be a little cautious about this because I know that in the folder where I'm working, I have all this stuff in there already, right? So instead of actually opening this as a project inside of NetBeans, because I have one named the same thing, I'm just going to start grabbing files out of here and dropping them into my current project. So you see my strategy? So you guys can do the same thing. If you haven't named your project, or what we're working on currently, JSF 2 demo, what you could do is you could actually open this as a project inside of NetBeans. It's not too hard to do. All right. I'm not worried about demonstrating that, because if you're really hell-bent on doing that approach, you'll figure it out on your own, frankly. Yeah. So I'm going to go into this folder structure here, and I'm going to start by first going to the web folder, and I'm going to find that document that we were just talking about, which is called student registration form.xhtml. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to drag it right to my web folder and drop it in. All right. So now we can go to it, double click it, and just pull it up, and there it is, all set to go. So now we can, instead of talking about the code in the book, we can actually look at it inside of NetBeans and see what it looks like. Yeah. And this is just going to create an interface for us, folks. That's all it takes, is just creating an interface so that we can interact with the users in the application. Let's get this back out of the way. All right. The next thing that we have to do is, I don't know if you guys noticed in the book, but they also have a little graphic in there, that little American flag icon. And you know what? We have to add that in too. Right. So what we have to do is we have to go back to our folder structure here, and we actually want to right click on top of the web pages node and choose new and select folder. Yeah, and then what they're suggesting that we call it is resources. So they're having us kind of plan ahead here. All right. So we created a resources folder, and now inside the resources folder, they want us to create another folder called images. And now, do you have to do like a folder inside a folder? No, you can go right off the root. But what they're showing you is it's not a bad idea to kind of collect all your external resources in one area and then subfolder them. So if you had like 1,000 images or 100 images, it could all be there and not interfere with your other stuff. All right, now that we have that images folder created, we can actually go back to that unzipped folder that we had and actually come in here and grab that icon, the little American flag, and we can just grab that and drag and drop it directly into that folder. And then what you should do is make sure that it gets there. All right. Now you got to keep in mind that we already have the code here that looks for it, but I want you to look at that code a little more carefully now, right? So instead of using a regular image tag, we are using the H tag, which is going to create the image tag for us. It names it, right, the name of the file, and then notice it points to the library. So it has like this built-in infrastructure where it knows where to look for it. And that's why we created a resources folder, because that's kind of a convention
You don't have to do resources
inside of this. I guess we'll find out. How about that? We'll find out. Yeah, because Nathan's question was, we don't have to say resources last image. Let's see. And you know what's funny is, what did I name? Yeah, see, I named it images, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's probably not good. But yeah, let's change the name. I'm going to come in here and change the name to image, because that is going to screw it up. Because plural, singular, yeah, that will definitely mess it up. Yeah, yeah, you know what? I could have done that too. I guess it would have been less destructive to change the name in the code, but.
So how does it bypass resources? Makes the code be very short.
All right. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in a bean file that's going to do some of the coding on the back end. Now, we already experienced before that when Glassfish is running, which it currently is, it'll start to squawk when we start to throw Java files in. So I'm going to be preemptive, and I'm going to make sure my Glassfish tab is up, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop on the server to terminate the process for now. and we'll let it do its thing. It takes a few seconds to actually shut down. But the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull in a file from this folder structure that we have, and we're going to go to the source folder, to Java, yes, JSF2 demo, and what we're looking for is the registration JSF bean, which is this one right here, the Java file, not the class file. The Java file, keep in mind, is the raw code. The class file is the compiled version of it. So I'm just grabbing the Java file and then I'm dragging it to the source folder. And those of you who are astute on this will immediately notice that we have at least one problem. And the IDE highlighted it for me already because I called this JSF1 demo, and really it's JSF2 demo, right? Or converse, right? So I have to change that so the package declaration is correct. You'll notice here, let's take a look inside here and see what this is doing. All right, let's do that first. Looks similar to the other one that we were working with. Once again, it is request scoped, and we have a name value applied to it just called registration. So when we're calling it from the other program, we're just going to call it registration. That's how we're going to refer to this. Inside here, we start by building a number of private variables, which immediately should indicate to you guys that, oh, wait a second, we're building a class here that will be instantiated as opposed to one that's just running a method. Okay, so we're creating fields for last name, first name, middle, gender, major, minor, hobby, and remarks. Notice that minor and hobby are arrays because they could be multiple selections, so it has to allow for multiple entries. We do have a constructor function which is empty, so apparently we're not going to be calling it. Each one of the fields has a getter and a setter pre-created for it, for each one. And then finally we have the method at the bottom, which is going to pull the responses back to the HTML document. And there's a couple of real significant things here to learn as we progress. First of all, let's try to figure out what logic is happening here. I think that's pretty helpful. So the first thing I'm noticing is it says if last name equals null. So if there's no last name, we're going to return nothing. That's not good, basically. You got to at least have a last name. Otherwise, we're going to set all the minors to an empty string, and for however many of those we have in the array, we are going to add them or append them to that array structure just to kind of read them all in. And I want you to notice what they're doing here. This is kind of weird, actually. Really what they're doing is, with this routine and this, is they're reading in all the stuff that's in the array. So if somebody says, well, I'm minoring in math, English, and psychology, right? It'll read all of those in and append them to a string. So really all this is doing, this is a plus equals, it's concatenating. So it's taking all the stuff that's listed and concatenating it into the string variable. Then we go to the hobbies and we're doing the same thing. We're reading all the hobbies, you know, baseball, football, I don't know, beer drinking, whatever college students do, right? Minecraft, putting it all into one string, concatenating it. And then finally, and I want you to look at this return statement. The return statement is what? All it is we are returning is a string with a complex set of concatenations. Part of it is text. Notice though, in the form of HTML. So we're encoding our HTML right into the string. Could I change the tags? Could I put in other stuff? Yes. Do you also notice that because they're trying to encode styles in here, there's escape sequences to keep the double quotes from failing it out. So they're putting in these little escapes. You could also CSS it in the aftermath, by the way. You don't have to inline style it, but they're just showing you that as a technique. And then they just go ahead and they say last name is whatever the person entered. First name is whatever the person. So it's reading it from the front end of the form. This is what's going to happen. Reading it from the front end of the form, saving it as a variable,
Yep.
and putting it back out to the screen.
Yep.
That's what we're doing. So we're going to capture what we got, put it back out there. Right, so it's going through, it's pulling all the info in, it's creating our HTML. Notice the line breaks with the closing slash, right, which is required in this format. And then we're done. I mean, that's kind of the entirety of the whole thing. Not really too hard to figure out. All right. You know, yeah, let's go ahead and actually save this. I'm going to click my Save All, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a right-click Run File on student registration. This is going to fire up Glassfish again. And not that I'm paranoid, but I always like to bring the output windows up and just kind of finish watching it. Looks like the build is fine. Glassfish is launching. It takes a little while to do its stuff, so let's let it. And then we'll get poised here with the, hopefully the browser will jump up on screen here in just a sec. And of course, you know, when NetBeans is doing its stuff, it will show you the processes that are running here, and then you can always stop them from here too, and it will stop everything, just so you see, like right down here. All right, so I'm hoping that any moment now we'll get a browser up on the screen, but you know, it's a little patience involved here. So let's see what our form looks like. Hopefully it's beautiful. There it is. Okay, it's very zoomed in. It's at 200%, but yeah, you got the point. And let's just go ahead and just throw some stuff in there. I don't know, let's put some generic names in there. Of course they're a computer science major. What else would they be, right? And the minor is in math, right? And then, yes, tennis and golf. No, wait. Tennis and ping pong. Of course. And then we can also say this is cool right here. And then, of course, we can hit the button and register, and it doesn't do a darn thing.
Where'd it go?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing. The question is...
We did a return statement, but where does it go?
Yeah, we didn't tell it where to go. And so this is kind of the catch here, folks. If you go back to NetBeans and you look at this form, and I'm talking about the XHTML form, and then you come down here, yeah. So really what it's saying is the command button, it says value register. But you guys notice that it's a capital R?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Why not?
Yeah, that's my suggestion too, is why not?
Because the value of the name is registration with a lowercase r.
Well, here's the thing. We don't have anywhere. The thing is, we don't have anywhere for it to go yet.
Right.
Okay. So we do need to add another page. I don't know if we need to stop the server at this point, but if we're going to output this stuff back to the screen, we need to have somewhere to feed it into. So here's what we're going to do. We are actually going to pull in a different document that's pre-created called process student registration. Okay, these are the Java files, so we want to go up to here, back to web, and find the process student registration form. I'm going to get NetBeans in the background here, and just so I can drag and drop it directly in. I'm just going to grab it and then drop it up in the web area here. It's being a little sluggish is a polite way to say it. Yeah, it's like kind of frozen on my screen right now. It's not me. It's this. So I'm waiting for it to kind of recover. I'm not trying not to freak out about it, but sometimes the system gets a little weird here. And so I'm not letting go of my mouse yet because I don't want to drop in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not sure how many more seconds I have to wait for this to kind of wake up. Hello? All right, I'm not sure what happened there, but I'm going to do it again. All right, this time it seems all right. So I'm just dropping it right into that web folder. Let's go ahead and take a really quick look at the document. Notice Glassfish noticed that a new page was added and it kind of reacted a little bit. Did you guys see it like automatically do some stuff? No big deal. But let's take a look at what's happening here. Is it's going to put the form back up on the screen, but I want you to watch what's happening. Now, for each one of these input fields, it's going back to each one of those, and notice what it's doing here. In the value field, we can inject, the same way we did with that time bean, the JavaServer Faces code into this spot. Okay, so what that's going to do is it's going to call that registration JavaBean and pull in whatever's in that last name field, and it's going to populate it here. All right, and as you scroll through, you're going to notice that syntax recurring, and it keeps going, and it keeps going, and then here at the end, this gets changed to not just registration, registration response, because that's the name of the method that we created to pull the stuff back. So the other one looked cool and it was a great little form, but it didn't do anything. Just looked, yeah, it just looked nice. Without this other stuff added in, it doesn't have the capability of interacting with that data. So what I'm doing now is, let's go ahead and do a save all again. It looks like I already saved it. And then let's go ahead and right-click that file and do a run. We shouldn't have to restart Glassfish because we're not compiling any code at this point. That code is fine. But you see, it did rebuild it. All right, and this looked, okay, so it did throw an exception, but back in the browser, yeah, all right, so it doesn't like that. So we do have to stop Glassfish. Strike my comment from before. And then you can do a stop and start, or I don't know if there's also this one that says restart the server, but I already hit stop, so now I'm waiting for it to actually stop. And you'll see the buttons gray out when they stop. Real long system messages here. Holy cow. Yeah, I pressed it again. Okay. Maybe it didn't hear me the first time. I'm not going to restart the server. I'm actually going to launch it by coming up here and just doing a right click and then a run file. So it's going to reinitiate all those processes. We just have to be patient. All right, so now we're going ahead on this, and you know, I realize I may have had the recording paused for some of this, but just to kind of reiterate what I just did, just in case it was missed, is we did drop this file in, and then we stopped Glassfish, came up here, did a right-click, run file. I don't know how much of it wasn't recorded, folks. So, but the whole point here was that we dropped in this file, and we were looking at the change in the form by adding these hashtag preceded directives, just like we did the time bean. All right, and I apologize for that recording pause. I don't know where I hit the pause. So now here's the revised version of the form. And this time, if we do type stuff in, and I usually get lazy at this point when I have to fill out forms over and over again, and I'm going to just choose a couple of things like I did before, and hit register, and then this one actually worked. And if you look back at the code in the process, and maybe even a better way to do this is to bring NetBeans back up, come back here, pull the browser tab off, and maybe kind of do this sort of thing. And you can kind of see both at the same time. You can do a comparison. Boy, not very elegant screen switching here. It's like my second screen is really fighting me here. There we go. That was like pulling teeth. But basically, whatever we typed in here, the value, so whatever's typed into that form field is then sent over and instantiated basically inside the object in that external Java file, saved in the variable through a get. So even though this doesn't say set last name, that's what it's doing. It's sending it the last name, it processes it, stores it in a variable, and then when we get to the bottom here and we say registration response and we run that method at the bottom that pulls up all that code or all that text, then what it sends back to the browser is this, and we know it's right because it's all colored red, but it shows you that we can read from the form, process it on the back end with Java, reading the form elements one by one, saving them in a variable or whatever, and putting them back up on the screen. Piece of cake. Right? The other cool thing about it is if you want to, let's say, refresh this page, refresh, and actually, well, it's all, I guess it's all filled in, so I want like a non-filled in version of it. So let's do this. Let's jump off the page and come back. So maybe we can go to the and then we can go back. Well, the stuff is still there, right? But let's just say we type something else in, and we can do that. Just type whatever, just so we know it's something different, right? But it did work. So did it refresh the page or not? It did, right? I was hoping it would happen so fast you couldn't tell, but it is actually redrawing the page.
Really?
Yeah. It's keeping the stuff in the fields, and then it's pulling the stuff and adding that extra little bit at the bottom. All right. It's pretty simplistic stuff, but you know what? One step closer to us interacting with the database. So when we start to ramp up into the homework aspect of this, and we do start writing to a database, instead of pulling stuff, from a class that's instantiated or a text file or something, we're going to connect to a database and actually query the information out or store it or whatever. So you can see the power that comes with this. All right. And as far as more examples here, we are kind of running a little short on time. So I want to just be really clear as to how some of this technology works. So I'm going to give you 2 more examples, and I'm trying to figure out where I should put my browser window here. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then we can start shifting over to homework mode. All right, and that's going to be exercise 1, but a couple more quick little examples. I'm going to go back to that folder that I unzipped, and the next example that they have here is a calculator example. So I'm going to do this one quick. If you guys want to follow along, great. If you don't, you won't hurt my feelings, believe me. But the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do this calculator thing. So we're going to pull in both the calculator page and go back to the source folder and grab the calculator bean, the Java bean. I'm going to go into the Java bean first and fix the package declaration, which is going to highlight like it just did. And basically what we're doing here is we're just doing a classic programming problem, especially for GUI programming, which is to create a calculator, right? So we create an interface, and then basically we're going to have 3 variables, all doubles. The first number you're acting upon, the second number you're acting upon, and the result. That's what it is. Getters and setters for all of it, and then we set up methods for add, subtract, divide, and multiply. Pretty simple, right? On the front end, if we look at the HTML code, once again we see kind of the same type of thing that we've been doing. A little styling and stuff in there, but the real takeaway is we're going to have an input field that says all the stuff that it is, and then we're going to throw in the JavaServer Faces directive to attach to the external bean, and then throw whatever's in this first field into the first variable. This one will go to the second variable, and then the result. We'll have the 4 different buttons to represent the 4 different mathematical operations. And then by virtue of hitting any one of these, so this is like a postfix calculator, there's no equals button,
Right.
you just hit the action,
Yep.
right? You put two numbers in, and what do you want to do? Add them? Okay, click add. And then it will put the result back in the third box. So if you want to see what that one's like, I think Glassfish is probably going to yell at us, but we'll
Yep.
try it anyhow.
Feel it.
Yeah, did it? Yeah, of course it did.
I got mine to run.
Yeah, my Glassfish, well, you're luckier than me then. I'm going to do a restart of the server. You can see it doing its work there. All right, I'm keeping a careful eye on the clock here too. I'm being kind of mindful of that. I'm trying to get as much of this lecture-y stuff done tonight, and then next week we can strictly do the exercises. Although you guys can, I want to give you the information you need to be able to do it so you're not lost, basically. Now, I don't know if the browser is still waiting.
39.1 and 9 for next week.
The due dates have already been adjusted, if you're wondering. Doesn't make sense to have you turn something in like the day after I lecture on it, right?
I'm going to see if I can try to do the factorial one, because I was actually pretty good with factorials, isn't it? Like, 2 times 1 is 2, and then you do 2 times 3 is 6, and you just keep going on like that. Isn't that what how factorials work?
Not exactly. We'll talk about that in a second if you don't mind. All right. Yeah, apparently I needed to do a rebuild here, so there we go. All right, so here's our silly calculator. Put in a number, put in another number, and then press the button, and there are the results. So classic silly little programming exercises, now just pushing out to a web browser. Nothing really too fancy, but just to show you what you can possibly do. As you look at your book, and I'm going to pull the book back over, so that was one of the example exercises, and all the examples that are in the chapter are in that zip file. And what I would suggest that you do, because it's just kind of good to play with them even if you're not hand coding it, is to just try them all, follow along with what the book is doing, and try each one. So when you get past the calculator one, they have another one that talks about session tracking, and that's a pretty important concept in application development. And the way they try to demonstrate it is with this guess a number game. So basically you put in a number, you keep guessing, and it'll say too high, too low, and then until you finally figure it out, and here's all the code for it. This one, of course, is what they call view scoped, and they got all the code for it and the HTML front end. Pretty simple stuff. The next little section talks about validating input, and what you'll discover is that with the F prefix, they have a number of different fields. Now, you learn validation a lot of different ways when you're a programmer, and you know, the big advent of HTML5 though is all the advancements in the form elements and how they built in a lot of validating components directly into the tags, which saved us from like a lot of either client side or server side or both validation. But usually, I'm going to tell you what, because when you're building applications, if your ultimate goal is to put stuff in a database, the general rule of thumb is it's okay to validate on multiple levels, because the database, if you're not sending good data to your database, if it's not clean data going in, it can really mess up your database, right? You're sending like a phone, or you know, text characters into a phone number field, for example, you know, that kind of thing. All right, so they do have some special ones that you can see here that you could, you know, employ. I'm not really too worried about you guys focusing on that, but it might be useful for some application development that you might do. Here's all the code, the front end and the back end. But then we're going to move on to this section, which is really important for us. All right, so let's take a look at this really quick. So the topic here is to actually take what we've been doing, all the stuff that we're doing in the browser, all the little techniques we've learned so far, and start connecting ourselves to an actual database. And this is where it actually gets kind of scary powerful, you guys. Because here, if you're running Java code server-side, and Java has this great ability to interface with a lot of different types of databases, and on a really powerful level, as a matter of fact. You have this capability of doing some stuff that with some other web interfaces isn't quite as elegant, honestly. All right, so what they're going to do here is they're going to build this little thing that allows you to basically create an interface, pull down a course, and then display the students that are registered for a course as entered in your database. This is some cool stuff. Now, the one thing that we have as an advantage here is we've already built out that database on Apollo, right?
Yep.
And that's what we would interface with. So if you want to go ahead and try this, and I'm looking at the clock and I'm wondering, do I have time to even demonstrate this? All right, let's give it a shot. All right, see if we can squeeze it in the few minutes that we have left. All right, so the first thing it says is create a managed bean named course name. Now, here's the thing: we're not going to do this from scratch. We already have all the files created, right? So we're just going to be dragging them into our project. So no, we're not really creating a darn thing. We're just cheating a little bit. But you know what? It gets the point across, and we see that it's working, which for me is, frankly, more important. Let's be preemptive and stop Glassfish now, because we know we're going to be adding Java files into the mix here. So let's go back to the unzip folder. Let's find course name in here. Course name JSF bean right here. I'm going to pull that into the source packages. At least I think I'm pulling it in there. There we go. And I'm going to open it right away, and I want to fix that package declaration immediately, so just so I don't forget.
Yep.
All right, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a way to display this information, and we're going to use the file called display student in the HTML, or excuse me, the web area. So where is that? Display student right here. Let's drop that in. Kind of a quirky interface, honestly. Let's open that up and take a really quick look. So this is going to create what we see in the chapter, which is, first of all, a label and then a drop-down box with a list of choices for the different courses. The courses are going to be read in dynamically, okay? And then with the results of what we pull back, we're going to create a table. And as we create the table, we're going to create various columns with headers, and certain information is going to be fed into each one, so you can see the little directives of what it's pulling back. So Social Security, first name, middle, last name, phone, birth date, department ID. And it's going to put that all into a table format, so these are all the columns. And all these columns are going to match up with the stuff that we saw in the bean here. And then I want you to notice as we go into the bean that this is starting to look a lot like the stuff that we've been doing with our database programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to tweak the settings that we have
With the Java book.
in here to match what we have on Apollo to actually make the database connection. So if you guys remember, fortunately they're using the MySQL driver, right? And yeah, my name's not Scott. In fact, I use this. And password is my password. Yes, that's what it is. And they have all of the same kind of stuff that we've seen before in our database work, all the same types of statements. And then they set up an array structure here that will read through whatever database entries we have and pull it back, including the titles and list of the courses. Then we're also putting together a SQL statement here that's going to select all these different fields from the student table. We also have a little exception handling in there. There's getters and setters for all the stuff. We also have, very quickly, a result set up so that when it pulls stuff back, we make sure that it's not empty. And then if it isn't, it begins to display them one by one row at a time in the table, and executes the query. I would spend more time on this, folks, but we are that tight on time. It's already end of class, so I'm hoping to demonstrate this. So we did make a couple of alterations here, so make sure you do a save all before you launch. And then I'm going to come up here to display student and run file. Now I'm doing this real bravely because I'm not even checking my database on Apollo to see if that table exists,
Right.
and that data exists. Maybe that's a little too rash. Let's be just momentarily preemptive, and I'm going to log into the database and just make sure that I have stuff there I can connect to. So this is my account here. I do have a Java book. Let's take a look at the tables. What tables are we connecting to? Student, right? Do I see a student table here?
No.
Yeah, no. We want to look at the SQL code really carefully.
Okay, student 1.
Yeah, well, there's student 1 and there's student 2, but you know what? Is there anything in there? Well, here's student 1, and student 2 looks empty.
Yep.
Yeah. So either we change your code or we change the name of the table. Yeah, that would seem like a little bit shorter technique, right?
A little bit quicker.
Yeah, I think it'd be a little bit quicker. So let's see if we can. Well, how do we edit this?
Okay.
If you want to add to it?
Yeah, you know what?
Wait.
Yeah, well, I'm looking for the actual
Oh. Yeah.
edit here, so I'm gonna see if I can go back up. You know what? I think I'm just gonna err on the side of caution and just change it here,
Yep.
because I think I can do this faster than figuring that out right now. And I also noticed, and I don't know if you guys caught this too, that one of these has a lowercase s. Did you see that? Oops.
Which one has a lowercase s?
First name.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's
Yeah.
it's the same thing as it's usually on the table.
Yeah, you know, I'm second guessing myself again because I'm seeing that it's also pulling from this table, right? And what other table? Course. I don't even have a course table. Okay, so this is doomed from the start. All right. All right, so let's just suffice it to say this, all right, because I know that if I run this, we're going to run into a problem. Yeah. But let's just suffice it to say that when this works successfully, just like it did with our GUI applications, it'll go out to the database, read in the data, and pull it into the HTML front end, depending on the stuff that we select. Now, I could go ahead and actually create a course table. And I'm just looking at all the steps that they have here. Yeah, so they actually have like a whole series of steps here. We just don't have time to do it here in class, you guys.
Yeah.
So here's what I suggest to you. Follow the in-chapter examples and do it. Next week when we come back, we're going to work on exercise 39.1. And if you've worked through the rest of the chapter exercises with all the database stuff, that's going to help you a lot in getting the homework done. The programming exercise to start with is this. To write a factorial. Now, they don't tell you what a factorial is. That's one thing. So one thing you have to go out and do is do a little research. Now, what I'm hoping is when we come back next time, we'll work on the homework, but I'm thinking that what I'll do is maybe I'll complete the rest of those steps that we're not completing here so you can see the database interaction, because it's really helpful for doing project work, frankly, because I'm realizing now that the 2 exercises don't actually do a database interface here. So, one step at a time.
Yeah.
We accomplished a lot tonight, including getting a proper working IDE in place. So next time we come back, we're going to
39.1 and 9?
31,
39.1.
well, whatever the 2 exercises are, but we're also going to finish these database examples just so you guys can see how it functions.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. All right, this video ends here, and I'll see you all next week.